Welcome to another episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. I am your host, Graham Hall, joined once again by my co-host, Zach Goodall. And if you have seen the news or you haven't seen the news, you're finding out from us here firsthand. Florida has parted ways with head coach Billy Napier, despite the Gators defeating Mississippi State Saturday night in Gainesville 23-21. This was something that had been heavily speculated. We had written about it over at Swamp247. Our last podcast episode was discussing whether or not Saturday's game would be, regardless of the result, the final game for Billy Napier in Gainesville. And now that has come to fruition. We have a lot more clarity. Before we jump in here, get Zach's thoughts, I just want to talk about what the last couple of hours were like for me. We realized that there was a really good chance this was going to happen today. And being in Gainesville, I drove over to the Florida football facility where it was business as usual, pretty quiet for the majority of the morning. There were a couple of coaches in the building. Some unofficial visitors were mingling around the facility. Players started to show up before the morning was over, which isn't out of the norm whatsoever, because on a Sunday, even when it's a bye week, players that need treatment are going to show up at the facility or to get a lift in, whatever it may be. That was the case early on. Then we got word that Florida's typical coaching meeting, which is usually held at either 1 or 2 or 2:45. This time was scheduled for 1 o'clock, was going on as usual. And I reported that on social media and over on the board over at Swamp247. Some people took that to mean that a change was happening, but it was still business as usual until we got word around 1 o'clock that a meeting that wasn't previously scheduled, a player team-wide meeting, was going to be held at 2 p.m. Before that could occur, word got out from inside the building that Florida was parting ways with head coach Billy Napier. Players were told after that, and by 2:15, Billy Napier had left the Florida football facility with a lot of the team still in attendance, presumably to talk amongst themselves, to rally together, to talk with Billy Gonzales, who is going to be the interim head coach, which we're going to get more into that in a couple of minutes. But this has finally come to fruition. And I say finally, not because I'm saying it should or shouldn't have happened whatsoever, but because this had been so speculated and there was a lack of clarity or direction that something needed to be said or something had to happen. Because in the game, in the aftermath of the game on Saturday against Mississippi State, not only was Billy Napier having to address it, but DJ Lagway and Makai Burrow, after making the game-saving play with the interception there in the final minute of the fourth quarter, was being asked about it. And that situation, while it makes sense for players to be asked about, the speculation is unfair for the people inside the building. And the sooner that it could be rectified in one way or another, whether it was a vote of confidence for Billy Napier that he would stay on through the end of the season and potentially beyond, or whether they made the determination, it only made sense to do right by the people within the program and allow them to not have to face the noise about something out of their control, something uncertain. So came to fruition here on Sunday. And Zach, I'm going to jump in, get your thoughts here. There was a lot of speculation about who Florida's interim head coach could be, whether it was Gonzales, whether it was running backs coach Jabbar Jalouk, whether it could have been associate head coach Ron Roberts. Now, Ron Roberts was one that I thought was probably the long shot, even though he's done such an impressive job with the defense, because you would have thought that that would have led to him coming from down from the box to the field. So a change that could have led to a drop-off defensively for a UF defense, which has been really impressive the majority of the time this season. Billy Gonzales, though, from looking at his resume, national championship head, winning coach under Urban Meyer, being here now for his third stop, a guy that I think a lot of the fan base can rally around. Does this make sense to you, or are you a little bit surprised maybe that it wasn't someone like Jabbar Jalouk or even someone potentially like Russ Callaway, knowing that he is the offensive coordinator in name at Florida? Could be a great opportunity for him to continue his rise in the profession. What do you think of the decision to name Billy Gonzales the interim head coach at Florida?
I think it's the right choice. And personally, I thought it could really only be him or Jabbar Jalouk. And when you consider this suspension that Jabbar Jalouk is coming off of 3 games for his involvement in the altercation at the LSU game, it kind of removes him by default. I don't think Scott Stricklin or Florida would have moved to put him in that position unless, of course, that incident had not occurred. But I mean, yeah, you reward loyalty, right? And Billy Gonzales, there's no one more loyal I think, on this staff, even if you were to include Billy Napier among those people, than Billy Gonzales has been to the University of Florida. He's on his third stint, 12th season with the team after previously being here under Urban Meyer, as you mentioned, Dan Mullen, as you mentioned. I think he's had 13 receivers picked in the NFL draft. So obviously there's a really strong resume there in terms of what he's done with his position groups each time he's been here. And I mean, you look right now at and I know this extends well beyond the wide receivers, but like you look right now at Vernell Brown and Dallas Wilson, what they've been able to do this season. If you were to stack up all of the assistant coaches based on what they've done this year, I'd say you'd probably want to put Billy Gonzales near the top of that list in terms of doing an impressive job. So yeah, to me, it makes the most sense. And I'm in complete agreement with you on the coordinators too. Like, they've not announced this. I think it's very easy to assume, all but guarantee, Russ Callaway will be calling offensive plays as the offensive coordinator moving forward now that Billy Napier, the previous play caller, is no longer here. And I just wouldn't see the benefit of naming a coordinator the interim head coach. That's putting a lot on their plate when they're trying to energize the team, trying to salvage what's left of this season as they begin this coaching search. So you wouldn't want to do the exact same thing that Billy Napier was doing as the CEO and the play caller. You want to let those guys go and just stay in Callaway, take on a new job. But for Roberts, stay doing what he's been doing and not letting anything get in their way.
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense for Gonzales. You know, like I mentioned, national championship winner on Urban Meyer's staff, the names that he's recruited, how much respect he has, not only of the current regime, the athletic department, but the Florida fan base, right? I mean, this program needs to put someone in a position that fans can rally around. You know, I know a lot of people sit there and think that when a firing occurs that the season is lost. I mean, I understand that in a sense, but, you know, Florida's going to continue to try and make it to bowl eligibility. There's so many players, like we've talked about, who are in their final season of college football. They're not going to throw in the towel and quit and say, hey, I'm going to let the game pass me by and hang it up. I mean, these guys are still going to continue to fight. And Billy Gonzales is someone that you're going to want to fight for. I mean, he's an energetic personality, has devoted himself to the University of Florida. You rarely see someone come back in general, let alone a second time. I mean,
right.
His loyalty to the program. And I think the other aspect is him being a veteran makes a ton more sense, because this is a fraternity at the end of the day. I mean, the last thing you want to do is, and no offense to Russ Callaway, he's going to get his shots down the line, but you don't want to put someone, in my opinion, who's younger over someone who maybe has worked for this opportunity, and it could be a critical opportunity for them. So I think from that aspect, it makes sense. I think that regardless of whether the situation with Jaluk at LSU had happened or not, that, in my opinion, Billy Gonzales would have been the name that made the most sense, just given the Florida ties. And now fans are going to get a chance to see what they've been calling for so long. A head coach who, like, I agree with you, is not going to be the offensive play caller at Florida. I do expect it to be Russ Callaway. We'll get some more clarity on that in the days ahead. Certainly, Florida's in a bye week, so a little bit of time before the next competition. The Gators next take the field at 3:30 p.m. on November 1st in Jacksonville against Georgia, who defeated Lane Kiffin's Ole Miss, which, if you've obviously been paying attention, all the speculation regarding Lane Kiffin out there is one of the hot names for the Florida job. An interesting situation whatsoever. You can check out Zach Goodall's hot board over at Swamp247, the first edition of it. We'll probably have another one, just given how these things usually play out. So check that out over at Swamp247. Ton of other content as well, recruit reactions, and a statement from Scott Stricklin that came out as well. We have written it up over there at Swamp247, but it was pretty notable in my mind. And I want to touch on this before we get into the last segment of this podcast. Scott Stricklin acknowledged that, and it was kind of a strongly worded statement in my mind. He acknowledged that Napier did a ton of great things for the program, the players he brought in, the culture, the respect that he had within the athletic department. But he acknowledged that the on-field results were not of the level of a championship program that the University of Florida has. And I know that Florida is still sitting here and has not made the college football playoff. And some people will say, well, it's been almost 2 decades since the program won a national championship. Those expectations are still high. And seeing from the athletic director an acknowledgement of that the record that Napier had, despite all the other good things, which is probably why he lasted as long as he did with a 21-23 record, the on-field results have not changed. And to see Strickland acknowledge that, I think is wise. And, you know, we can talk about this a lot more, but Scott Stricklin has his own reputation within the Florida fan base. And it was good, I think, in my opinion, for fans to see him acknowledge that the results that Napier had were not cutting it, everything else aside, and that they are going to have a secretive search for an elite head coach out there to lead them to the contender status that Florida fans have so desperately wanted to be at. And I do think that given all of that, it makes a ton of sense for the athletic director to come out and say that even before the search has really gotten underway here in a sense here. Although I did note on the previous podcast that Florida has had so much time to make this happen. They've known that this is something that was potentially coming, likely coming for more than a year now. Zach, what did you think of Scott Stricklin's statement? And what do you think are, and I know you're going to be writing about this a little bit more at Swamp247 on Monday, what do you think are the qualities, aside just the blanket statement of an elite head coach who understands what it takes? What do you think some of the qualities that Florida's going to look for in its next head coach are?
Yeah, I thought the statement was sharp. I mean, he said a lot of the things that he needed to say, and I do appreciate his perspective on what happened with Billy Napier behind the scenes, yet being willing to acknowledge it doesn't matter how nice it was and how positive things were behind the scenes, how Napier might have cleaned up the organization. The results weren't there, and that's what this is. He even quoted Billy Napier calling it a results-driven business and said that what happened behind the scenes did not translate. But to me, the most interesting part was about the confidentiality to protect the privacy of those involved in this coaching search. And also him acknowledging, while not directly saying that he may not have done a great job on his last coaching search, saying that anytime you conduct one, especially for a high-profile sport like football or men's basketball, you learn something. The lessons from past experiences will guide us through the work ahead. Yes, I agree. Like, they've had a year to really get the ball rolling. But like, to what extent can you get the ball rolling when at the end of the day, your head coach is still here and you're committed to him? They've at least had the time to vet, right? They've had a lot of time to put together a list of coaches that they would want to consider when they fire when they fire Napier, I should say. We're here now. There's not a need to rush it, I don't think. And I know Florida fans may be irritated to hear that, but it is the bye week, week 9. Like, they don't have to have a coach hired by week 10 or week 11 or silently agreed upon. Obviously, if they're going to pull someone from a bigger school, that would be what fans might expect. But last time around, I think we talked about this a couple pods ago. Scott Stricklin zeroed in on Billy Napier and very quickly landed Billy Napier. He knew that's who he wanted. He didn't really take much time to interview anyone else. I don't believe he interviewed anyone else officially. You have to this time. You can't just zone in on one guy and think you got him. You got to honestly interview as many candidates as you can. Back channel as many candidates and their agents as you can to create a wide pool. And truthfully, you got to allow more people to be influential, not necessarily make the decision, but Scott Stricklin's the people that he trusts, people that are involved in the recruiting process outside of the staff, right? You obviously think boosters. You want to, if I were him, I would at least want to collect input from the people who make a day-to-day significant contribution to this program and take your time to make sure you get the right guy this time. And that's the vibe I get. That's what him saying that sounds like to me. And especially when you consider the timing in which they've let Billy Napier go too. They don't have to rush it. And I don't think they will. And yeah, I'm going to write more on the prospect of like what Florida needs in its next head coach. I think the obvious one, and this is maybe something that would be down the list a little bit of priorities, but like we were talking about, a head coach not being the play caller, someone who, even if they want to do it at least expresses right off the bat that, if it's something that they can't manage in this day and age of college football, even with the expanding front office staffs that might take work off of their plate, that they would be willing to make the change that if it's in the best interest of the program when that time comes. We talked plenty about Billy Napier's stubbornness when it came to giving up play calling and how he believed he was the best man for the job, internally or externally, for that matter, over the years. That just obviously wasn't a winning formula. And maybe, there are coaches out there that still call plays and some find success, but you need to find someone that if they're willing to do that, they also need to be equally as willing to know when to give that up. And there are a lot of other qualities. I'll put them in my column as well. But to me, that's like the early standout. That's the one I keep going to when I think as I prepare to write this story.
Yeah, there are certainly a lot of people out there who believe, fair or not, that Billy Napier's decision to remain as the offensive play caller was his undoing, in a sense.
Yeah.
I wrote 5 days ago that he believed when he got here on December 5th, 2021, that in his introductory press conference, he believed that being the offensive play caller would give Florida an advantage. We sit here less than 4 years later, and people wonder if that's actually the opposite, if it hindered Florida. And I do think it's fair to question, because everything else in the program was so, well done, in my opinion. He had the support of his players. There's a lot of people in that facility right now who may have known that this was coming and trending in this direction, but they're disappointed, if not very saddened. I mean, he was well liked. It was really everything that I thought he did well, aside from the in-game coaching management. And there were other things in games, not just offensive play calling. They had too many penalties and special teams miscues. And there's a small margin for error in college football right now. And if you don't have everything tight, organized, lined up, and managed correctly, you're probably going to not have the results you want. And Florida certainly was on the receiving end of too many of those undesirable results. As a result, the Billy Napier era at Florida is officially over. The Billy Gonzales interim era has officially begun at Florida here for the next 5 games. So I know a lot of fans are going to rally around him. They're going to rally around this team. Through the adversity of the Billy Napier era, that's something that was extremely commendable, is that the fans continue to show up, voice their support, even if they were booing Napier at times or booing some of the decisions. They were spending their hard-earned money, going to games, and that's commendable. And I know that's going to continue despite the parting of ways, the coaching change, where you normally will think for some people there's going to be apathy and that they're going to check out. From being around this Florida football program my entire life, I know that's not going to happen. They're going to support these players who are going to keep fighting, even though a lot of people would make the case that what are they putting their bodies on the line for right now? To make bowl eligibility, to play in a postseason game that essentially is meaningless if they're not going to make the college football playoff. I know that Florida fans are going to continue to support them, and they're certainly going to rally around Billy Gonzales. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. We're going to have a ton more coming in the days and weeks ahead. There's expected in the near future, there's going to be a press conference to address what occurred. Billy Gonzales will meet with the media at least as early as next Monday, before Florida on October 27th begins preparing to take on Georgia in the world's largest outdoor tailgate in Jacksonville for the final year, for a 3-year span before that goes to Atlanta and Tampa. So a ton of stuff coming over at Swamp247. I'll also be dropping something on the top 10 transfers that Florida absolutely cannot lose to the portal, even though the transfer portal rules are a little bit different right now, and actually give Florida a good break in a sense, because no longer is the portal, if this had happened 2 months ago, the portal would have opened right away today for 30 days, and players like DJ Lagway, Miles Graham, Vernell Brown, Dallas Wilson could have entered the portal freely and opted out of the season if they wanted. Now, the portal does not open until 5 days after a coach is officially hired and announced, giving the new coach 5 days to retain as much of the roster as possible. And the portal does not open in December. It opens January 2nd and runs through January 16th. Normally, even though there will be now 2 windows for the Florida program, after the coach is hired and then the normal new window in early January. So a lot to come moving forward. We'll be back with another episode of the podcast later this week. Basketball season is right around the corner, even though that's not the focus of this podcast. It certainly is something to be excited about for Florida fans. But again, that's going to do it for this episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. For Zach Goodall, I'm Graham Hall, and we'll see you next time.